Live this afternoon. We're chatting with the mayor, Mayor Raye Miller, and talking about the city council meeting last night and trying to understand what's going to happen in the future here when the vaccination numbers get to where they are. But you said you had a couple more items on the agenda from last night you wanted to mention.
We wound up under the city clerk. We wound up having a resolution for our para-employment contribution. And basically, our employees are either in what we call the diversified, which is more like a normal 401k, or they're under para-public employment retirement account. And for the para-employees, basically the employee contributes 25% of whatever the state requires in total, and the city contributes 75%. And while the resolution looked really funky, because what we were doing was they required us to show how much of the employee contribution we were contributing, and so it was different for each different group of employees, and none of them said 75%. That's the way that by the time the employer and employee contribution are totaled together, that percentage of the employee with what the employer pays is 75. So the council approved that, and that's, not each one of the communities actually pays that much. And so obviously what's coming out of the employee's side, if they pay a higher percentage of that working in some other community, they bring home less net. Their salary may be higher, but they may not actually net as much given the contribution that the city does. After that, we had executive session and just had a couple of items, personnel matter and some pending litigation, nothing exciting there. And met back in open discussion, or after executive, had one action that was the ratification of a termination of an employee, and that was the end of our meeting last night. I think it took a little over an hour, but I think if we hadn't had as much festive discussion, the actual meat of the agenda was probably closer to 30 minutes. But it was, and I mean, getting some information about the aquatic center and different things that are going on. Chief Hope also talked about the exhibit that's coming and the change in venue and different things. And so, those updates are good. I mean, it keeps everyone kind of informed as to what we have going on. We also obviously are working on the budget at this point. We have a preliminary draft, but I know council will wind up probably having the second meeting next month will actually be targeted towards finalizing and approving the final budget for next year, which actually begins on July 1st.
I was going to say, doesn't it start July 1?
It does. And we're not as bad as Congress that never gets their budget kind of put together, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. They haven't had one for, I can't think of how many years since they've had one. So
yeah, and also ours requires that we actually have reserves if we deficit spend, which fortunately the city's financial condition is still in good shape, because I know there's been a lot of discussion about some of the issues with some of our neighboring communities. I think Lovington's financial condition is not real good, and that's, I mean, it's truly a credit to our council and the continuity and the leadership on the council that has kept things at a moderate pace when times are good, and then tried to make sure that we protected our employees when times were bad to actually get through to the other side. And I'm tremendously, I'm pleasantly surprised that we have done as well through the last year as we did, because it does not appear that we're going to wind up being any less reserves at the end of this year. In fact, they anticipate by June 30th that our reserves will be a little higher. Of course, that means that, it's been a struggle by our departments to try to keep, enough employees to actually get all the work done. But we do appreciate, I mean, there have been certain departments that have put above and beyond in the way of effort to try to actually keep the city in good shape and make sure all the essentials are taken care of, even though they're working in many cases with 65% of the size of crew that they had pre-COVID. So I certainly appreciate their efforts and their hard work. And I mean, I'm really thankful on a day like today that I'm not part of that crew, because if I was working at the house outside, I would already either have wanted to spray my weeds or mow my yard and be inside with a glass of iced tea, because from here on out, the day becomes a real challenge to actually work outside.
Sure. So. Now, it's been a while since we've seen any major road construction projects in town. Is that in part because of the budget constraints and the staffing constraints, or?
Well, we've, the next project that we're working on or will be working on that's major, well, they've got a project on 20th Street that they're doing, but that's not quite as large a project as the artery stuff that went on from North 13th to South 13th and then up Hermosa and ended at 26th. Our next major artery project is actually 26th Street. We received some grants from the legislature for the engineering on that, and it allows us, by not being quite as fast, to actually accumulate a little more money. What the city had been doing was basically borrowing for each one of those phases with bond issues, and it would really be nice if we can figure out a way to actually use more current money instead of creating debt that we then have to obligate our infrastructure tax to repay the debt in future years. And those bonds, the way they were designed, have a lot of early principal payment, and so they're not as burdensome in the long run. But it also winds up being a thing where if we can accumulate our own funds to where we either borrow a lot less or can find a way to not borrow at all, it would be far better for us. And so we're not quite as fired up. Now, they reported last night that we have completed the extension out on West Hermosa, because our first, extension out there went just as far as the first phase of that subdivision. Well, they actually have begun work on the second phase of that subdivision just west of the first phase, and so we needed a second access point off of Hermosa into that. And so we extended that on out. So there are some projects actually going on, but it's a thing where we're trying to make sure that we stay inside, where we're not spending huge dollars that we have to borrow or can't afford in the long run.
Yeah. So when you say 26, you're talking about from, say, Hermosa down to Grand?
Right.
Okay, that stretch through there.
Yeah, that's the next major artery construction, and that'll be interesting. Thankfully, they've got the Hermosa 26th intersection, because getting to J.C. Park when that was closed was a real...
Right.
And now that we're back to actually living more normal life, everybody's making the trips to J.C. Park for, either Little League, softball, or other activities out there, and so it's nice to at least have that to where we should be able to access the park, at least from Hermosa, not have to go around by the bowling alley and stuff.
How do your infrastructure folks look at just a simple, like a repaving project? Like some of the streets in town are starting to get kind of potholed and stuff like that.
I think that's what the 20th Street, it's one that has been targeted here in the last couple of years, is having a significant deterioration, and that's why they're doing it. The committee and Byron, they look at all of the areas around town to try to figure, where the greatest needs are, and to kind of keep a consistent path of working on different areas each year to try to keep things to where we're not, having where you lose a VW bug in a pothole.
That's never good when that happens. And I know you talked previously, months ago, about the new water tank coming online out at J.C. Park.
Yeah, it's all on, and everybody's pressure. In fact, I think plumbers had a little bit of extra work helping folks repair some of their sprinklers that popped off and different things that. But I think the pressure on the southwest side of town is now more normal water pressure than what they had when their shower dribbled, because everybody in the neighborhood was all showering and there wasn't enough line pressure to actually.
And that's good, because there have been so many new homes that have been built out in that on that part of town. And I know from time to time you'll see the water people show up because a fountain blows up in the middle of an intersection or street, and that's always a challenge, especially in the older parts of town, trying to keep up with those incidences that happen.
Yeah, and it's a thing where those are not good events because they're expensive for us, as well as we're not selling water if it's flowing down the gutter. So,
that's true.
But we're still pumping it out of the ground to send it down the gutter.
So, but it's inconvenient too for the people that live in those neighborhoods. So you're constantly trying to keep ahead of those things too.
Yeah,
so
that's for sure.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to share or talk with the folks about?
No, it's a thing where I appreciate the council and all that they do. It winds up being a thing where I certainly am very appreciative of our employees, especially the guys in days like today that work outdoors. I mean, we have them both, out at the transfer station. We have them at the wastewater treatment plant, parks and streets. I mean, a lot of those folks, when it's 70 degrees, it's really nice having some of those outdoor jobs. When it's 106 in the afternoon, you better be drinking a lot of water, and I really appreciate their service today more than normal, because my heart goes out to them, because it is a pretty tough day to work outdoors.
Very good. Mayor Raye Miller, thank you so much for your time. We always appreciate it, and we'll see you here in a couple of weeks. We're going to take